Hello YouTube, welcome back. Chris here. Today I'm going to show you how to assemble a bike out of a box. In front of you I have an Electra Townie, nice simple bike, easy to build. I'm going to go step by step what it takes to assemble this bike and make it ready to ride. First thing we got to do, let's open the box. Once you got the box open, you can usually reach down and grab one of the wheels and slide the whole bike up. Make sure when you pull your bike out of the box, you get the accessory box. You're going to need that. A lot of times the saddles come loose, and this has an additional seat post. There are two things I like to do before I start fully unpacking the bike. Number one is get the seat post. Got it here, unwrapped, and in the bike. That's going to give me something to put it in the work stand with. Number two is to remove the front wheel. The front wheel is usually zip tied on the side of the bike like this. And it comes off. That'll allow you to get it in the work stand easier after you put your seat post in. Now before I put my seat post in, we're going to grease the seat tube. Hit the can of grease, brush, just a nice little amount around the inside of the seat tube, and that's going to keep our seat post from binding up in the future when we try to move it up or down a couple years down the road. Slide that seat post in and clamp it down. This has a quick release on it. Some bikes have a bolt, so you may need to use a 4 or 5 millimeter Allen wrench instead of a quick release, but this has a quick release, so we don't need that. Let's go ahead and put it in the work stand. When putting a bike in the work stand, it's always important to have the drivetrain, the side of the chain, the gears, the crankset facing outward. That way you can work on the bike without having it being facing away from you. Now that we have the bike up in the work stand, let's go ahead and start unpacking. Alright, so I got the bike all unpacked. I've saved you the boring process of watching me do that in real time. Next thing we're going to do is put the handlebars on. So I'm going to zoom in a little closer here and show you how that works. But before I put the handlebars on, I'm going to have to put the stem on. This bike has a little cap here that goes over the stem, or I'm sorry, over the headset. Make sure your fork is facing forward. If you have a traditional bike like this, the brakes are supposed to face towards the front of the bike. And then this is called a quill stem. A quill stem goes down inside of what's called the steerer tube here and expands, and that is what's going to hold it in place. So this just drops down inside this hole. Pay attention, there is a minimum insert on here, so you do need to have the stem at least that far in, otherwise it's unsafe. And at this point in the process, you don't have to worry too much about keeping it straight with where the wheel's going to be, because we're going to adjust that again later. We're just trying to get it on there so we can get the handlebars on there. From there, we have a 6 millimeter Allen bolt that runs down through the top of the quill stem. We're going to get that snugged up. I'm not going to make it super tight yet because I am going to adjust it again. After my stem is installed, I can go ahead and put the handlebars on. This has two 5 millimeter bolts here. I'm going to undo. And keep in mind there are other kinds of stems. This is called a quill stem. There is a stem for a threadless fork that is probably equally as common, but works a little different. Those will usually already be installed on the bike, so you won't have to worry about them. You may have to spin the stem around. Sometimes they ship them backwards so they fit in boxes better. Once we got our handlebar where we want it, the handlebars typically have these lines on it, and that's what makes it so it doesn't slip in the clamp here. You want to make sure you're balancing those lines so the handlebar is nice and centered. And again, we're going to adjust this again too. All these final adjustments to make the handlebars fit right and feel good where you want them, we're going to do when the bike is on the ground, so it feels like it would when you were riding it and not trying to eyeball it while it's up in the air. But we'll go ahead and tighten up our stem bolts here, and our handlebar is on. The next step in assembling this bike is going to be to put the front wheel on. Now the wheel usually comes with some packing little caps or plugs in it that are designed to make it not scratch anything. So you're going to need to pull those out. And then you're going to need to find your quick release. This is almost always shipped separately in a separate box inside the box. It doesn't come in the wheel. This quick release has a lot of pieces to it. It's got these two springs called centering springs. They need to face cone side, the small side of the cone in, like that. You can go ahead and unthread the one side of the quick release, and you're going to put it through the middle of your hub. Now, you have to pay attention to which way the wheel goes on. The treads have a directional pattern. A good way to remember this, if you look at a tread, typically it's going to point forward. So you can see the lines kind of pointing that the tire turns this way. So making sure that you have that going right. The quick release skewer goes in from the non-drive side. So the side that doesn't have the drive component on it will go on this side of the bicycle. So if the wheel is going this way, I have to put it through this side of the hub. And it's real simple. It just slides straight through. Make sure you got your centering spring right. If you put this on backwards, it will get in the way of your axle, so you don't want to do that. It goes this way. And your quick release. Once this is installed in the wheel, now we can slide it up into the bike. I'm going to get a little closer and show you how the quick release works from the other side. So you're going to pull the wheel up into the dropouts of the fork, getting that axle up in there. And then, while pushing upward to make sure this hub stays up in the fork, you will thread this quick release, not all the way, but until you take the majority of the movement out of it. And then you're going to flip the lever to tighten it. So when you tighten it, it shouldn't be too tight like this where you can't close it, but it shouldn't be too loose where it closes easily. So you want to turn this, and I am holding the other side of the nut to make this thread. So where it closes firm like this, so it takes maybe a little bit tighter, a little bit of effort, but not a lot. A lot of people think this is one of the simplest parts of building a bike. It's actually the part I see done wrong more than anything on the bike. So making sure you get that quick release right is very important. The next thing we're going to install is our pedals. Now this is another commonly messed up step. I've got my pedals here. They label them left and right with stickers because it's real common for people to do this wrong. But they're also stamped into the steel spindles on the end, an L and an R. So basically, if you're sitting on the bike, whatever to your left and right is how these will go on. This is the right, that's the left. Take a little bit of grease and just a dab on the pedal spindle or pedal threads so that they don't bind up and don't strip out. You're just going to start with your fingers, get it threading into the crank. You can pedal backwards while holding the spindle to make it go in quicker. Once you get to this point, you're going to want to take a pedal wrench or a 15mm wrench of some kind. Pedal wrench is what I recommend, but if you don't have one, any 15mm wrench will fit, and tighten that pedal up. You're going to do the same for the other side, and we'll have our pedals on. So next we're going to put our saddle on, but I want to show you this because there's a couple different ways that these seat post clamps work. This one is actually the one you'll probably see less often, but I'm going to show you both types. If I flip this over, this clamp has several pieces. Luckily it was already installed. If it wasn't installed, you have to put these rails through this clamp, which isn't too hard to do. You do need to make sure that this hole is in front of the bolt that attaches everything here. You don't want it behind, so the seat will actually sit back behind the seat post, not out in front. That's very important. If you have the other style, which looks like this on your seat post, much more common to see, likely the seat will already be on the seat post and then you just slide it into the bike. But let me get a saddle and I will show you how that works. In this situation, you take your seat. This seat, as you can see, has nothing on it, just like this would if it didn't have this clamp already on it. And you'll basically loosen this up, put it on, rotate the top cap, and then tighten it down. You can also adjust the angle of this with this tooth section here. You rotate it before tightening it down. Like I said, most bikes with this style seat post will come with the seat already attached to the post, but if not, that's how you put it on. In this case though, we don't have to worry about that because this bike has this style clamp and it's already on, so I'm going to show you how to put it on the bike. So now you just take your seat, slide it over to the smaller part of the seat post. It tapers down to fit that clamp, and then with a 13mm combination wrench, you just tighten these two side nuts. Now you want to tighten them evenly. You don't want to tighten all from one side, so you want to tighten them to make sure that it's pulling evenly. Also keep in mind, just like the handlebars, we may have to make some adjustments to this once we get the bike on the ground. So you don't need to be worried too much about getting it perfect until it's on the ground and we can level the seat the way we want it and make it right. Most bicycles will come with the front brake not set up if it's a V brake like this one is. If you have disc brakes, this is not going to be very helpful for you. At this part, I will try to do a supplemental video with disc brake setup, but a little bit different than doing a V brake. But for the most basic type of bikes, this is what you're going to be working with. You have a cable that comes, usually coiled up like this. You undo that. You'll have something called a brake noodle. It's a right angle, metal looking noodle. You'll fish your cable through that, just like that. You got a little rubber boot or a dust cover that slides on the cable. And then this cable is going to go in right here, and the rubber piece will keep it in place, at least temporarily, until we fix it to the fixing bolt. Fixing bolt over here, 5mm Allen wrench. Just loosen that up a couple turns, no need to take it all the way out. The cable will slip then behind the fixing bolt, and you can pinch the calipers together. Now you are going to need to adjust this brake after you fiddle with the brake pads, so we're not going to tighten it down super tight yet because it will kink the cable a little bit if we need to make a large adjustment, but enough to get the brake set up and at least functional. From here we can start tuning the V brake now that we have it set up. First thing I like to start with is the brake pads. Another 5mm Allen wrench right in the side here for a V brake pad. I like using the Y wrenches for this because it kind of fits nicely in the palm, but any 5mm Allen wrench will do this. And then with my brake lever, I can pull it tight and kind of use that to control the brake. I'll loosen up my brake pad so it moves up, down, left, and right. I can line it up with the brake rim surface, kind of clamp down, snug it up a little bit. Test it, make sure it's contacting the way I want it to. And then I like to hold the brake pad and snug it up tighter. And that one should be good. We'll do the same for the other side. Again, loosen it up, make sure it's got nice motion to it with my brake lever. Line it up with the brake surface. Clamp down. Give it a little bit of tension. Went a little bit too high. A little bit of tension, and then letting go of the brake, hold the brake pad, and tighten it down. Now if you look at this brake, you'll see it's mostly pulling from one side. That's what these little screws down here are for. These are called centering screws. With a screwdriver, I can tighten or loosen these screws. So if I tighten it, it's going to pull it more from that side. So if I tighten this side, the brake is going to pull more that way. If I tighten this side, the opposite. If I loosen this side, it'll do the opposite, it'll pull that way. So as you can see, it's pulling mostly from the left, so we're going to tighten the right. We give it a couple of turns and test again. Still pulling hard from the right, so I'm going to give it a couple more turns, test again. Still pulling hard from the right. At this point, I'm going to try and back off the screw on the right. Starting to get a little action with the other one. Tighten this one up a little more. And that looks pretty good. After you do this, want to check your pad contact again. Make sure they are where you want them. And that should do it. It is very important to note that if your wheel is not centered in the fork, if you put it in crooked and you adjust the brakes, you're going to have to readjust the brakes. So an easy way to know if this is right, take a look. Almost every tire has a center line down the middle where it was molded. And most forks have this little hole, and you can eyeball line it up with that little hole just to make sure it's centered. You can also see the gaps here, make sure these are even, at least eyeballed to be even, so that the brake sets up right. The last step in adjusting this is make sure the pole is good so that the brake lever is not going all the way to the handlebar, and it's also not super sensitive, so it has a good amount of throw to it. I like to leave these long, so it makes it easier to service. And your bike should come with some little end caps. These end caps just slip over the cable and you can crimp them down. I like to crimp with a side cutter because it's a little sharper. I don't cut all the way through, but just pinch it with it. And it does a good job crimping these nicely. And then with that cable, I can kind of bend it into place and tuck it back behind here. It kind of catches on the spring, so that kind of gets it out of the way. And that front brake is done. The rear brake does come fully set up, but we will want to at least check the tune of it. And this is basically this exact same procedure as you do on the front brake. Some manufacturers are better than others about how they set up these brakes in the factory. Sometimes they don't need much tuning at all, and sometimes they are a complete mess and need to basically be 100% set up. Just depends on how much they're going to do before the bike ships. I'll get my pads where I want them. So pull this guy over, as the brake is mostly pulling from the left side right now. There we go. Another good point to mention when doing this, these screws are often aluminum. They're very soft metal. Use a very nice screwdriver and make sure you don't strip these out because it's easy to do. All right, brakes are set up. Let's move on to tuning the drivetrain. Now this bike is just a 7-speed. It does not have a front derailleur. Just like with disc brakes, I think I'll make a supplemental video on how to tune the front derailleur. And these are usually set up pretty good, but could use some tweaks, or often need some tweaks. What you have here, your rear cassette, derailleur, everything is already assembled, it just needs to be tuned. So how you do this, start pedaling the bike. I like to start in the highest gear, or the smallest cog in the back. And then one by one you shift through the gears. As you can see here, it's hesitating. I'm just going to do a simple turn of the barrel adjuster here. As I turn this outward, you're adding more tension to this cable. And now it's shifted up nicely. I'm going to shift it back down and double check that it is smoothly shifting, and then move on to the next gear. As long as everything is good and not jumping. And we'll run through the whole series. No clicking, no jumping. That was a pretty simple one to do. The other thing to keep in mind, or another thing to check, is these are called limit screws. You have 2 limit screws. What these do, they're labeled, you probably can't see it on the camera, H and L. H for high, L for low. High is going to be this side and low is going to be this side. What they do is they stop the derailleur from moving too far. So in this end, if you tighten up the high one, it's going to limit how far the chain can move toward the inside of the bike. And same thing up here in the low, it's going to limit how far the chain can push out into the wheel. Usually the manufacturers set these up right. but it is good to check it. The way you do that in the highest gear, pedaling slowly, because you will scratch up your bike if it drops the chain, gently pull on the derailleur, and you can also look downward to make sure it's lined up straight with that cog, but it shouldn't be able to pull the chain off with a little bit of pressure on the derailleur. Same thing if we go into our lowest gear. We shouldn't be able to easily push the chain into the wheel. So if that's the case, your limits are set up right. If not, you may need to tighten or loosen a little bit to bring the chain either in or out. At this step in the process, I like to get the bike down and make my final adjustments on the ground. First thing I do is get the seat at a reasonable height. And then I hop on the bicycle. Standing over the bicycle, I can make sure my stem is properly aligned by looking down it with my tire. This is why we didn't tighten these things all the way initially, because we were going to adjust them again. Once we tighten that stem up, we'll check the handlebars. You want the handlebars to be rotated in a way where the hand grip position is mostly level and comfortable to ride in. And we'll tighten that up. And then from here, all I have to do, inflate the tires, put some reflectors on, and this bike is ready to ride. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. Hopefully it was helpful for you. If you do like it, please like and subscribe. I'm going to make some more videos like this, and we will see you next time.